Hello, doctors. I'm your host, Chip Fitchner, the co-founder of Large Practice Sales, and you're listening to Practice Partnership, Monetizing Your Practice. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very, very special guest, an exceptionally successful orthodontist by the name of Brian Anderson. Brian Anderson is not only famous with his patients, but he's famous in that the Orthodontic Pearls Facebook group is one of the largest Facebook groups that allows doctors only to join their group. He also is the founder of the Mother of Pearls Conference, which is held this year in San Diego between October 12th and October 14th. And this is really a great opportunity for doctors to collaborate with a lot of younger doctors. The great thing about the Mother of Pearls Conference is certainly they don't exclude us old guys to go to the event, but it's very attractive with the younger doctors. And these are innovative, growing practices that everybody can learn from. And October 5th, we'll also be doing a webinar, Brian and I urge you to join us. But for now, let's get started. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Chip, for having me on. It's always good to see you this time virtually, but we've had a chance to meet in person a number of times. I love to chat. I love to philosophize. And so I'm really grateful to be on the podcast, but I want to do something different if we can today. I want to actually flip the script, because I'm working on my listening skills, which are not very good, admittedly, can be a lot better. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. I read an article recently that you had written called The Dental Trifecta Revisited, so I want to touch on that. And then just, again, going back to the Mother of Pearls, thanks so much for your support there and your kind words there. It is an amazing conference, and I feel like it's such a great opportunity to rub shoulders and to learn. And I'm looking forward to your presentation on October 13th. I've learned a ton about DSOs from you, from the literature that you put out, from your previous presentations at the MOPC. So really looking forward to that. So again, thanks for your support. Thanks for being a part of that. But going to this idea of the dental trifecta revisited, if you could, can you just give a brief sort of high-level summary of the dental trifecta revisited, and in particular point out the revisited part? What was different in it this time from maybe the first go around? What's changed?
Sure, absolutely. So, the dental trifecta is not really a new concept. We just executed it for the first time on a large scale. In the summer of 2019, an investor came to us and said he wanted to invest in the boom of dental practice consolidation across the U.S. And this was a self-made multi-billionaire who was a very shrewd investor. And I suggested to him that probably the best way to create value in the dental consolidation boom would be to do a dental trifecta. And a dental trifecta, by my definition, and we do own the trademark dental trifecta, the dental trifecta in my definition was where an invisible DSOs are those which do not rebrand their practices, do not attempt to micromanage them, do not attempt to homogenize the practices that they partner with. But a dental trifecta is where a invisible DSO would partner only with pediatric, orthodontic, and oral surgery practices in the same community. And the theory was, and the theory proved to be correct, that once a practice was a part of a group or part of the same group, that they would refer to other doctors within the group. And thus, if you were able to partner with multiple practices in the same city or community, you would drive up internal organic revenue growth, because as you added practices to that group, they would start referring within the family rather than to refer to practices that were not in the family. So we started executing that strategy in that we partnered the billionaire investor with the largest orthodontic practices in Montana and Wyoming. That functionally became the initial platform for the dental trifecta. And that group went on to acquire 110 practices from us and another 100 practices without us. I don't know how they did it. But by the time September of 2022 rolled around, 35 months after their initial platform practice acquisition, They had 211 offices, and they were generating over $100 million in EBITDA collectively. But what was most important was that my theory that you would have internal organic growth due to changes in the referral patterns, that's what gave that group the highest value that has ever been achieved by any DSO or invisible DSO at a recapitalization. And so the article Dental Trifecta Revisited was basically a recap because I had written an article 2 years earlier in 21 saying I believed that the dental trifecta was going to be an extraordinarily effective and profitable process for both doctors and the financiers of invisible DSOs. And fortunately, in a mere 35 months, we went from a great idea to a $2 billion valuation. And so since September of 22, there are 9 other groups pursuing the dental trifecta strategy. Investors tend to be lemmings, and they have now seen the incredible value that was created by that one. And so there are now 9 other groups pursuing the dental trifecta strategy, and they are bidding against each other for great practices, especially great orthodontic practices.
I do like the idea of the trifecta. So as you know, I've actually joined a trifecta myself. Pedo feeds ortho feeds oral surgery. So that makes a lot of sense in that regard. And you just mentioned that, of course, there are a lot of other opportunities. And in my opinion, I think the fit, matters a lot. And there are a lot of models that can work. But going back to the trifecta specifically, you had mentioned the word partner, to partner with a trifecta. So in your article, you mentioned that means selling 51% to 90% of your practice for cash up front. And then there are other benefits like help with administrative duties, reducing costs, higher reimbursement rates, that type of thing. One of the things that I have found surprising, I'm a relatively young guy. I'm 41 years old. So I still have a lot of years ahead of me in terms of practicing orthodontics, and I love doing it. So I foresee myself practicing for quite some time. But one of the things that surprised me is how many younger doctors have ended up partnering. So can you talk about that in terms of what are you seeing? Why do you think that's happening? What's the benefit of joining at a younger age? And let's say you're in the twilight years. Does it still make sense? I'm interested in what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's been a dramatic shift in the last 3 years in that the number of younger doctors who are choosing invisible DSO partners has grown dramatically. So of our $612 million of transactions last year, 102 million were for doctors in their 30s. And that would not have been the case 3 years ago. So the reason younger doctors are choosing to partner with invisible DSOs, there's a long list of them, but number one, they're excited to offload a lot of the administrative minutia. The invisible DSO is going to take over banking, payroll, benefits, accounting, compliance, credentialing, IT support, legal, tax, and payer and vendor negotiations. They're not going to ask you to change the products that you use or how you use them. But they will say, hey, you love the Damon brackets. We can buy them over here a lot less than you can because we have 200 practices and you are one practice. So they can bring a lot of administrative headache reduction. They also can be very successful in helping marketing. We have one particular group that we've probably partnered a dozen doctors with. And though the average doctor saw a 28% increase in production in the first year after partnering with this particular invisible DSO, because they were exceptionally good at digital marketing. So that's part of the process that we urge doctors to go through, because every doctor, whether he's 32, which is the youngest doctor we partnered last year, and that was actually an orthodontist, to a doctor who's 62. And the benefits are not just administrative reduction, certainly cash up front at closing at long-term capital gains tax rates, which is a mere 20% federal today. That's attractive. Having liquidity in troubled times is very attractive. But I think ultimately the reasons that the younger doctors are doing these transactions is because they see the upside in a minority position of the equity in their practice as being much larger than owning 100% of their practice and remaining independent for the balance of their careers. And the only reason that works is because the invisible DSOs actually live up to their promise to not micromanage your practice. They're going to invest millions of dollars in a great practice, and the last thing they want to do is break it, by angering the doctor by not living up to their commitments of autonomy. They want the doctors to continue to make the hiring and firing decisions. They want the doctors to decide who gets a vacation when, including them. And these groups are not going to dictate schedules or products or procedures or anything, really. So that once that message has gotten out to the younger doctors, there are many more younger doctors choosing this opportunity. And because of that, you're actually squeezing out the value of some of the older doctors. So what I tell doctors today, and I'm 63, so I can pick on old people, but what I tell doctors is that if you're over 55, you need a plan today, because the practice value is actually declining as you get older, especially if you're a single doctor practice. If you're a multi-doc practice and you're the old guy at 63, but you have 4 young associates in their 40s, that's not an issue. But if you're a single doc practice and you have a 6 in front of your age, now is the time to fully understand this option, because the challenge is that orthodontic practices are extraordinarily valuable. And today, an orthodontist can't monetize his practice in the ways that they used to by selling it to an associate at 80 or 100% of collections. We haven't done a deal for an orthodontic practice in 5 years that wasn't worth at least 200% of collections. So the exit strategy for a doctor who has a larger practice really is an invisible DSO partnership is the only way they're going to maximize their value, both short and long term.
Yeah. One of the things I think is interesting about what's happening is with how DSOs have come onto the scene, and that's changed the landscape of which practices are available, right? I feel like it's very difficult to consider selling to an individual doctor when you can join a DSO or an IDSO and get more, cash up front and things like that. So, what are you noticing in that regard? Do you think this is going to continue for the next several years, or what do you see happening there?
It's interesting. The ADA put out a report about 90 days ago talking about dental consolidation, and their report said that they believe that 18% of all orthodontists today have either partnered with an invisible DSO or actually work for a DSO. And that is higher than pediatric, for instance, at 11% or GPs at 13%. So they believe ortho is the most consolidated of all of the dental practice types. The old doctor to doctor transition model where a doctor is getting into his late 50s, he hires an associate. The idea is that the associate will ultimately buy the doctor out and the doctor retires, which is the old model. And that still exists. The challenge is that if you go back 10 years ago, 15% of all the dental school graduates or ortho school graduates went to work for a DSO or an invisible DSO. Last year, the estimates are that over 30% of all the graduates went to work for a DSO or invisible DSO. So you have, in essence, reduced the buyer pool for the old traditional associate buy-in model. So it's changing rapidly. And whether this is driven by COVID or not, I don't know. But consolidation is accelerating. And part of what's driving that is the amount of new capital that has been invested in the invisible DSOs. And there's over $5 billion invested in the invisible DSOs, not the DSOs, the invisible DSOs, just in the last 4 months of 2022. And what's interesting is where that $5 billion came from. It came from groups that were new to dental consolidation. And it came from some very sophisticated investors, including the third largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. They dipped their toe in the water by investing $1 billion in an invisible DSO. BlackRock, the world's largest money manager with almost $10 trillion under management, dipped their toe in with a little $2 billion investment. So the amount of capital that's flowing into dental consolidation has, in essence, kept the values up, and it's kept the number of bidders up. I mean, we're seeing more bidders today for practices than we've ever seen, part of it driven by this new capital. So values are up, and the number of choices for the doctors are up. A great orthodontic practice in our process is going to typically have 8 to 10 qualified bidders to choose from. So the consolidation is continuing. The younger doctors who may be interested in buying you out have less capacity to do so, and there are a few of them that are interested in doing that.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to mention, you talked about 8 to 10 bidders. I've worked with you. In fact, you guys set me up with the group that I joined, especially Dental Brands. And I think it's really, really important to work with somebody that is well connected in the industry and has more exposure in terms of whom they can negotiate with and which groups they can bring to the table, I think that's incredibly valuable. So going back to this trifecta though, because you talked about 18% from what I remember of orthodontists have joined a DSO or an IDSO. So obviously in orthodontics, we're often treating younger patients, of course, in pediatric dentistry is all young patients, and oral surgery often is young patients because they're extracting wisdom teeth. So in your article, the Dental Trifecta Revisited, you mentioned how with this trifecta model, focusing on children's care and the care of younger people could be more resilient during turbulent times when the economy's down. Delve into that for me, please. Talk about what you're seeing there and how you think that's beneficial in a time like now. I mean, nobody really knows what the next few years are going to hold in terms of how the economy is going to respond. So is now a good time to join a trifecta?
I believe it is, but it's a very personal decision as to whether somebody wants a partner or not. It's just like having a doctor partner, right? There are many solo practitioners out there who have remained solo practitioners because they like to make all the decisions by themselves alone in a vacuum. There's nothing wrong with that. And functionally, when you partner with an invisible DSO, it's like having a doctor partner. You're going to clear any major decisions or changes or investments in big technology through your partner. But as a general rule, they're going to leave you alone. But the reason the trifectas in part have been successful is because they have created organic growth through the referral patterns. Right now, the age of the patient issue is important because we have 2008 to look at. When you look at an orthodontist from 2008, 2009, who had a heavy adult concentration of patients, their numbers fell off a cliff. Whereas the orthodontists in 2008, 2009, who had a significant pediatric focus, they did not fall off the cliff because basically adults will defer their own care to make sure their kids get taken care of, which is perfectly logical. So today, when I get calls from orthodontists who have a significant adult concentration, I'm very upfront with them and say, you may want to work on adding more pediatric orthodontic cases to your portfolio because your heavy adult concentration is going to hurt you from a number of bidders and from a value standpoint. Part of the reason that the dental trifectas have been successful is when you compare them to an orthodontic only invisible DSO, they have 3 times as many partner targets. They can partner with pediatric practices, they can partner with ortho practices and oral surgery practices. So they can functionally grow 3 times as fast through partnerships. And the other thing is it diversifies their risk. Ortho last year, depending on the pundits you listen to, saw an 8% decline in case starts. That was somewhat offset by the fact that 70% of orthodontists raised their case fees last year. So overall revenue declines were not as significant. But when you look at the pediatric business from last year, pediatrics actually increased, and oral surgery also increased. So a trifecta, in essence, diversifies the opportunities for the invisible DSO, and it diversifies the risk for the doctors.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's true that, in fact, one of the things that I think is the most beautiful that I see on a daily basis is parents putting their kids first. And I often have to remind, these teenage patients who kind of come in there and they're surly and they're not happy about being there. I kind of have to remind them. I say, hey, listen, I just want to point out what your mom and dad are doing for you. I mean, they could be spending this money on a vacation. They could be spending this money on a new wardrobe. They could be spending this money on new tires for their car. I mean, whatever it is. And they're choosing to invest in you. So I think that's one of the, beautiful things that we get to see as orthodontists. And it totally makes sense how having a practice that's maybe geared towards or with a specific focus of having younger patients would be more successful when the economy kind of slips a little bit.
Brian, I would love to carve that into a granite stone and send it to every orthodontist in the country, because every parent deserves the doctor, because doctors are respected gods in this business. And despite surly patients, you have an incredible amount of respect with your patients because of who you are and what you do and how you change lives by changing smiles. But every orthodontist in this country should be giving their patients what you just said.
Okay, so turning the page to DSOs and IDSOs, in my own experience, the prospect of money up front was enticing for sure. I think that's obviously why so many people have joined or are considering joining, why things are changing relatively rapidly. I'm surprised to hear that almost 1 in 5 orthodontists are part of a DSO or IDSO. I didn't know that. And I think, that's why young doctors are joining, or again, one of the reasons why young doctors are joining. I think it gives a younger person a better opportunity to build wealth because you can then invest that cash up front. Cash up front has tremendous value. You can put it to work. But you have to weigh, obviously, well, I'm getting cash up front and then I'm having this employment agreement. I'm going to make, less per year. So it becomes sort of this calculation or this, a risk, so to speak. What's riskier, the opportunity cost of not doing it, or is it riskier jumping in? Because after several years, you can make the argument, well, if I hang on to it over the long haul, maybe I'd make more money. If I can't, depending on what happens, after that initial employment agreement. So, of course, it depends on the organization that you join. It depends on a lot of factors. Obviously, how motivated you still are, whether you plan on practicing in the same area or not. But can you talk about that? What's your experience been in terms of working with doctors even several years ago that have invested? How have you seen their wealth build? And what do you think the risk is of joining versus not joining? Just if high level summary. Like I said, I know it's depends on the person.
Fair question. Fair question. And when you get to be my age, you will also think of things like risk. Now, we every doctor will live forever in their mind. I had 2 clients die last quarter, both in their 50s, one of a stroke, one of a heart attack. One practice was worth $5 million, now worth 0. The other practice was worth $6 million, now worth 0. So the big asset that doctor had spent his life building for his family disappeared in a single heartbeat. So I think that's something that doctors should keep in mind, is that there is risk. A quick story on risk. We had a client in the Midwest. This was an orthodontist, single doctor practice, 2 offices. He was personally doing $6.2 million in collections by himself. And this was not a particularly affluent community. His average case fee was about $4,800. So this was a guy who was working, and he was working 5.5 days a week. And so his practice, he became our client. We partnered him with a group that had 5 pediatric practices in town that had never referred a single case to him. They were referring to the other 4 orthodontists in town. This was a town of about 100,000 people. And before that transaction was done, I went to the other 4 orthodontists in that town and said, guys, you're about to lose 1,500 referrals from the pediatric practices. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. I said, yes, you are. And when it happens, your production is going to decline about 25%, and your practice is going to be, in my world, worthless because I can't sell a declining practice. Well, guess what? My client, as a part of the deal, we had to agree to find 2 associates that would start and work with him starting the day after closing, because his practice was about to double thanks to 1,500 new cases coming from his new partner's 5 pediatric practices. And that's exactly what happened. His practice doubled. The other 4 orthodontists in town saw a 25 to 30% drop. So the other thing you've got to consider is, while everything is rosy today, this world is changing fast. Your referral sources can change. And the other thing that's interesting that's happening is we're getting what I call the discount orthodontists. We'll look in North Florida, for instance, we'll call it the Tampa area. There are new practices, there are ortho practices that are popping up there that are offering full cases for $39.95, and they're going to finance it with no money down. And I've seen some of those practices go from startups to over $4 million in production in 12 months. Well, now their theory is that they are expanding the market by lowering the cost of orthodontics for, we'll call it a lower tier consumer. But the reality is those cases are coming from some of the local orthodontists who are the $5,500 guys as well. So that's another growing potential risk that doctors need to understand is that the dynamics of your fee schedules can change due to competition.
So if you just had to guess a percentage, because obviously there are a bunch of these DSOs and IDSOs popping up all the time. And some of them are going to start next week. Some of them started last week. Some have been around for a few years. Some of them probably have one practice right now. Some of them have 300. What percentage do you think will fail in the next 10 years?
That's an interesting question because, the invisible DSOs have been around for 35 years. And there really has not been a significant failure of an invisible DSO. Certainly there are some that have stumbled. Certainly there are some that have had troubles, but we can't think of one that's filed bankruptcy and gone out of business. So it's a relatively low risk, and it explains why $5 billion went into this in the last 4 months of 22. It's a consistently growing industry. If you look at a chart of dental collections over the last 50 years, it's straight up and to the right. And certainly you have
relatively
dips
safe
for things like COVID.
Safe.
Yeah, it's relatively safe. And so the invisible DSOs, I believe, have had a relatively low or extremely low failure rate relative to the branded DSOs, because there have been some branded DSOs that have gone out of business. And I attribute the difference in that is because when you have an invisible DSO, the doctors are all still owners. They have skin in the game. They don't get to walk out the door when times are tough because they're owners. So if you look at some of the branded DSOs that collapsed during COVID, it was because they had employee doctors who had the opportunities to go elsewhere when times got tough because they didn't have any skin in the game. They weren't owners. So my belief is that the invisible DSOs, and certainly over 35 years that's proven to be true, is when you have an owner doctor managing that practice, when times get tough, he digs in and makes it work. So will some fail? Yeah, absolutely. There's too much capital that has chased this business, so some will definitely fail. There is risk to that, but it's not as high as with the branded DSOs because you have owners that stick with it.
Right. And, maybe in this scenario, failure might be the 25%, increase in equity, right? If you're expecting 3x or 5x or whatever. So still not a bad thing, but I happen to agree with you there that, I think our industry is relatively safe, and particularly with an IDSO, what attracted me to that is the opportunity to stay an owner and to not really stir the pot too much, that we're still, foothill orthodontic specialists. People, in terms of how we look different to patients or prospective patients, we don't really look different. If anything, it's been nice to have some additional administrative help, like you had mentioned and you had talked about, and the transition in my particular experience has been relatively smooth. I mean, there are always bumps and hiccups and integration issues, but overall it's been really nice to kind of take some of the pressure off, honestly, in terms of wearing all these hats as a practice owner.
It does reduce your hats.
Delegate. Oh, geez. Yeah. And being able to delegate some more has been tremendous for me personally. So I've really enjoyed that. So you mentioned that in your article, the LPS can be a valuable partner. I can speak to that. You guys were great. And one of the things I think is so important about getting to know somebody, like we talked about at the beginning, I've had a chance to sit down with you a number of times, and your partner, Matt, a number of times. And one thing I find really important is that in life, when you interface with somebody, you actually know this person. There's something about that I think is incredibly important in terms of building trust. And of course, we all have, a reputation, whether good or bad, but when you actually get to know somebody, you can speak to that personally. And I can speak to that personally. I feel like you guys have been tremendously helpful. I didn't think you were ever pushy. You're obviously extremely knowledgeable. You're well connected. So talk to me a little bit about the value that LPS can add to somebody, because I know some people will think, but there's a fee. There's a fee. I want to keep all of that. I don't want to give any of that away. Is it really giving it away though?
The reality is you guys are smile experts. You're not deal experts. You make beautiful smiles every day. We do deals every day. So, I promise you we're better at this than any doctor is. And I know doctors are very smart, very highly educated guys, but this is a whole different world. And the big value that LPS brings to the table is we're going to have 8 to 10 qualified bidders for you to choose from. And ultimately, it's not about picking the highest bidder, and the bidding process does drive up values, of course. But really, the best value that we bring to our doctors is knowledge of those bidders and helping the doctor choose the partner that's the right fit for them. So we've never had doctors ultimately, after we completed the process, complain about our fee. We earned our fee. The values that we create because of the bidding process more than offset our fee, such that functionally what we do is free for the doctor. But ultimately, we make sure that our doctors talk to other doctors who have partnered with the group or groups that they're considering. And so when they get into one of these transactions, they know what to expect. They're not disappointed. They're not surprised. They're not shocked. They're not getting something different than what they thought they were getting. So those are some of the long-term values. But ultimately, doctors never complain about our fee. Yes, it's a big number. But because we don't get paid by the buyers, the net fee that we charge to our clients is far less than everybody else. Because if you choose one of the other guys that get paid by the buyers, then you're not going to see as many partners because they'll only show you to the groups that will pay them a fee. And Matt and I set that up as a bedrock philosophy early on 7 years ago and said, look, we're going to only represent doctors. We are not going to have a conflict of interest. So I think those are some of the values that we add in the process, but certainly there's knowledge involved. And we did do 250 million of ortho transactions last year, so we kind of know where the bodies are buried.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's one of the things that I really liked about you guys is that you're representing the client and there isn't the conflict of interest. And as a specialist myself, I mean, I know how important it is to work with the specialist. And, times in my life when I haven't worked with the specialist in terms of doing contracting stuff or just home repairs or whatever, I've generally been disappointed and I've thought, I know better than that. Why didn't I just work with the specialist? So I think there's definitely something to that. And again, in my own experience, you guys were tremendous and I've, really enjoyed working with you guys. So Chip, thanks for having me on. Thanks for letting me, switch things up a little bit. And as always, I've enjoyed chatting with you. And so I'm looking forward to your presentation at the MOPC, Mother of Pearls Conference. That's in San Diego this year, October 12th to the 14th. You're speaking on the 13th. And for everyone who's coming, you're going to hear some real high level stuff and you'll get a chance to interface with Chip. Take advantage of it. He's uniquely connected and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how smooth the experience can be. For those of you who have not signed up for the meeting, go to orthodonticpearls.org, sign up. You'll be able to hear Chip on the 13th of October, beautiful San Diego, and you won't want to miss it. So without further delay.
Thank you, Brian.
Chip.
Really appreciate it.
Adieu.
Thanks for listening to Practice Partnership, Monetizing Your Dental Practice, a podcast from Large Practice Sales. Large Practice Sales is the largest advisor to GPs and specialists of all kinds seeking to monetize all or part of their practice. The key for doctors to maximize your practice value is choosing the right advisor and the right IDSO partner. At LPS, we guide our clients towards partnerships with IDSOs that not only reduce administrative headaches, but give you the resources to grow your practice bigger, better, faster, and more profitably. And best of all, with the right IDSO partner, you can create generational wealth. If you're interested in learning the potential value of your practice in an IDSO partnership, visit our website at largepracticesales.com, or you can email us at podcast@largepracticesales.com. Follow this podcast for more tips you won't find anywhere else on how to monetize your dental practice at the maximum value. Learn from LPS, which completed over $600 million in IDSO partnerships in 2022.